Welcome back, Gadgeteers. Today we're going to talk about installing Fedora Linux on the Lenovo Yoga 920. Now this process was actually very easy, much easier than installing it on the Yoga 910, partly because of the way that the BIOS has been redesigned. So it made things way more simpler. And I'm going to go through each of the steps and what I did to get Fedora installed on my Yoga 920. So if you're going to install some flavor of Linux on your 920, you probably could follow these steps about the same. There's going to be a few differences, of course, depending on which particular distribution you are using. But the first thing you're going to need, of course, is a USB thumb drive, because we're going to put a live distribution on this thumb drive. In this case, it's going to be Fedora. So get yourself one of these. Now, if you're already running Linux, you can download the ISO and create a bootable USB drive in Linux. But I'm going to assume that most of you who are interested in Linux but haven't yet installed it haven't done that, okay? So I'm going to show you how to do it in Windows instead. So step one is to go to fedoraproject.org, download the workstation ISO, if that's the one you want to use. In this case, that's what we're going to assume. Download it to your computer. And then, here's the cool thing. If you'll notice, the file is only about 22 megabytes. So what you do is double click it, and it opens up the Fedora USB tool. And what this tool is going to do is download the actual installer files for the latest version of Fedora. So all you have to do is plug in your thumb drive, your USB drive, the one you want formatted, and if you want to, you can click the button that says format immediately after download, which I usually do, but in this case I did not do it. But just make sure you do select the correct USB drive. So after 5 or 10 minutes of download time, the USB drive will be erased and the live CD will be installed onto your USB and made bootable. Now, since we're in Windows right now, before you leave Windows, and this is very important, you need to click the Windows charm on the start bar and bring up Disk Management. You're going to want to find your particular drive, which should be the C drive. Well, I shouldn't say that. It should be the only drive. Don't go by drive letter. We want to go by the actual physical drive in the system. It could have many different partitions on it, one of which is going to be the C drive. If you click the C drive partition and then right-click it, we're going to select Shrink Volume. I had a 512 gigabyte SSD, so I had plenty of room. The only installation on the Lenovo Yoga 920, of course, is Windows. But I actually wanted to leave more room for my Fedora installation because I'm going to be using that much more than I am my Windows partition. So I shrunk my Windows partition down to about 200 megabytes, leaving the remaining approximately 300 megabytes for the installation of Linux. Next, make sure that your thumb drive is plugged in. Now, to make your life simpler, when you go to shut down your Windows system, and this is fairly important, before you click restart, make sure you hold down the Shift key, because we're going to want to go into the UEFI BIOS settings. All right, once the computer has shut down and restarted, you should see a blue screen that says choose an option. The option you're going to want to select is the troubleshoot option, and then on the next screen select advanced options, and then on the advanced options screen select UEFI firmware settings. Next, you're going to be told that the computer is going to restart to change UEFI firmware settings. So click Restart, and that'll take you into the BIOS. Now, this is fairly important. You want to go down on the security tab until you see SecureBoot, and you want to select disabled instead of enabled. The cool thing about this Yoga 920 BIOS is this is the only setting that you're going to have to change. We no longer are able to select between UEFI or legacy BIOS. Now that could be an issue for some flavors of Linux. I'm hoping it won't be, but I suspect it may be. But in the case of Fedora Linux, not a problem at all. You do want to check that from time to time. If during your use of Linux you find some strange things going on, like you try to install a software package such as VirtualBox, and I did talk about this in my last video, you're going to want to go ahead and go back into your BIOS and check and see if SecureBoot somehow got re-enabled. And I did have this case in my computer. I don't know if Windows 10 installed a new firmware package or what happened, but regardless, SecureBoot was turned back on. Once you've disabled SecureBoot, go to Exit, Saving Changes, and click Enter, and the computer will reboot again. Now, the Yoga 920 does not have a Novo button, which I really did like. So I've heard that the F12 key will prevent boot up, but it didn't work for me. So all I did was let it boot back up into Windows, and then without even logging in, you can immediately click the shutdown key again. When you do that, of course, you want to hold down the Shift key. Again, you're going to see the little screen that's blue that says choose an option. In this case, I chose use a device, and I just selected the USB drive, and I was able to boot right into my Linux USB. And this fourth step is to simply install Fedora. So we're going to boot up to the live CD, and then we are going to go ahead and install Fedora Workstation. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Alright, well, the steps are fairly basic. One, you can try Fedora by booting into the live USB and running Fedora, or you can install Fedora to the hard drive. Now, just so you know, installing to the hard drive is fairly basic whether you're doing it to a brand new hard drive or you're installing it to a hard drive that already has Windows on it. I prefer to shrink my Windows partition while in Windows, and I do recommend doing that. But if you want to, Fedora can attempt to shrink your Windows partition for you. Now, I have done it before and I've never had a problem with it. It's just a habit for me to shrink my Windows partition while I am in Windows. So I'm going to go ahead and click Continue. First thing it wants to know is where are you installing Fedora? So as this is a virtual machine, it only has one hard drive. So all I have to do is click the drive. There could be other drives here, but in this case there's only one. One click, not two. If you click it twice, it'll actually turn off the installation. So you want to make sure that check mark is right there to indicate that it's going to install to that drive. And then I click Done. And then finally, begin installation. So while the installation is proceeding, I'm going to go ahead and set a root password. And I'll click Done. And I'll go to User Creation. And I'll create a user. And I'm going to click Make this user an administrator. The reason I like to do this is because it's easier to do now than it is to later add your regular account to the sudoers group, which is basically what's happening here. So it's just a little bit simpler to go ahead and click the box here, and then we'll give it a password. And I'm going to click Done. So we get a progress indicator down here telling us how far things have proceeded. Right now we're at 13%, so it'll take just a couple of minutes and the install will finish. Alright, to finish up the install, all you have to do is click Quit. And remember, we're still booted into the live CD or your USB media. So the next thing we need to do is actually shut down the system, and once the system powers down, we want to remove the media. There's a couple of brief steps we go through to finish installing. We're going to choose our language. And again, the keyboard. I'm going to turn location services off, and I'm going to leave automatic problem reporting on. I'm going to skip creating online accounts for right now and cruise right to start using Fedora. The very first thing you're going to want to do once you get Fedora installed, of course, is to install the updates. I choose to do it using the terminal. You most likely can do it using the graphical interface as well. I find it's easier to use the terminal, and that's just a preference that I have. I use the command sudo dnf update --y. Let's make that a little bit bigger. I entered my password and I'll press enter. There's going to be quite a few updates initially for Fedora 27, so this may take a little while depending on the speed of your machine and your internet connection. Once all of the updates have installed and the system is rebooted, you're ready to log back on. At this point, you've got a basic Fedora installation. So if you click Activities, you have some basic applications that are installed. We have Firefox for internet. We have an email client, Rhythmbox if you want to listen to music, Shotwell photo viewer, the Nautilus file manager, access to different software and applications, and I added the terminal app here. If you want to see more applications, just click the Show Applications button. Now, normally it's selected to show the frequently used applications, but if you click All, you can see all the different applications that are installed by default with Fedora. Once the computer has booted up, on step number 5, you've created a basic login and log in as that person. And the first thing you need to do is blacklist IdeaPad _laptop. Now that's pretty easy. All we have to do is create a blacklist file in the etc modprobe.d folder. And the reason we have to do this is because we have to get Wi-Fi working. Initially, it doesn't work until we actually go in and run this or create this file. Now, adding that blacklist configuration file to the modprobe.d folder is something that you're going to need every time you boot up. But in order to get Wi-Fi working immediately, type in sudo modprobe-r IdeaPad _laptop and press enter. Hopefully you will see that Wi-Fi all of a sudden begins working. In my case it did, so it was no problem. Alright, so once we've got Wi-Fi working, step number 6 is to do Fedora updates. Fedora, the original ISO that came out, is very, very buggy, and as it is with most versions of Fedora, the ISO as it was released is buggy. It's not a updated ISO, unfortunately. I wish they would release updated ISOs when they release new packages, because it would become much more stable. So, first thing out of the gate, don't try to use it, don't try to do things in it, don't try to install individual productivity packages like GIMP and start working, because if you do, you're really going to regret it. Consider it beta, basically. So do that update. Number 7, after the update is complete, reboot the system. Don't try using it yet. You got to get that new kernel in and any of the other modules that cannot be installed while the computer is running. So you're definitely going to want to do that reboot. Number 8, set a host name for your system. So if you want to use some package like Samba and become a server, which I did, you really want to have something different than the default localhost.local domain. So set yourself a new name using the hostnamectl command. So we're going to type sudo space hostnamectl space set-hostname and then the name of your computer. Number 9, install some packages. The one that I always like is KDE Desktop. Now, of course, you could download the spin that has KDE Desktop, but I do like the GNOME 3 desktop that's built in, and sometimes I use that one instead of KDE Desktop. So I like to have both of them. Now, from here on out, I'm going to assume that you understand that you have to use the sudo command and type in the root password. Well, I should say your user's password to act as root, or you could just type in sudo space bash and become root. Either way. Next command, what I use is dnf space group space install KDE-desktop-environment. And that will install the entire KDE desktop environment and all the associated required packages. If you bought the Yoga 4K edition, you're going to have a few problems when you first log into the KDE desktop environment. You'll notice that everything is super duper tiny, and there's a few settings that we can change to fix that. Using your magnifying glass, the easiest way to do this is to click on the Fedora button in the lower left-hand corner, and then you're going to go to Settings, and then finally Display. Now, if you scroll down, you'll see Scale Display. You want to click that button, and I recommend changing scaling to 2.5. Now, it doesn't scale everything immediately, so what you'll need to do is log off and log back on. You'll also notice that even after doing the scaling and logging back on, the start bar is still really tiny. Well, that's easy to fix. All you have to do is right click somewhere on that start bar and you'll see some settings that you can change, and one of those will allow you to expand that start bar and make it a little bit larger, which is much easier to read. Number 10. Enable RPM Fusion. This is important because there are many packages, both free and non-free, and I'd like to point out there's a difference. RPM Fusion has two essential repositories. The first one is free, which offers all of the packages that are available that are truly open source. And then there's the non-free, although they really are free. What they mean by non-free is essentially these are packages that may not be open source or they may be proprietary, but they're being offered so that you can enhance the usability of your Fedora Linux. Number 11, install some packages. I'm going to give you the list of packages that I use, but they could differ for you, so it depends what you want to install. Of course, we're going to use the dnf space install space -y command. Now, the packages I usually install are govcview, Chromium, Rhythmbox, Kdenlive, my favorite editor, GIMP, TLP, and VirtualBox. So these are the programs that don't come already installed with Fedora Linux, and I add them after the fact. Now, the packages that I talked about, Chromium, of course, is the open source version of the Chrome browser. And I used to use Chrome all the time, but I've decided to go with Chromium, and I'm doing some testing, and I know there are some slight differences, so there may be some features that are missing in Chromium that you need in Chrome. If this is the case, then you're going to want to install Chrome. The next package that I use, Rhythmbox, is for music. Kdenlive is my video editor. GIMP is my photo editor I use for creating thumbnails for my videos. Of course, VirtualBox is for creating virtual boxes. And the last package, TLP, is very important. This particular package you're going to use to control power consumption on your Yoga 920. Initially, I did not install the TLP package, but if you don't, you're going to find that your system is going to consume much more battery power and you're going to have a shorter runtime on the battery. After you install the TLP package, you're going to want to enable it. It's pretty easy. Just become root and type in TLP space start. Now we want to ensure that TLP starts up every single time when you boot up. So what we're going to do is type in another command. We're going to type in systemctl space -enable space TLP. And this ensures that the TLP service starts every single time your computer reboots, so you get the best possible power savings when you're on that battery. Number 14, depending on your Yoga 920 model, you may discover when you're in disk management way back in step 2 or 3 that you had Bitlocker enabled, as I did discover. In order to get access to your Windows partition, you're going to have to go into Windows, go into Disk Management, and disable Bitlocker. Now this is going to take quite a while because every file has to be touched when Bitlocker is disabled. When you do this, ensure that your battery is fully charged and you're plugged into power. You do not want any disruption of your system while Bitlocker is being disabled. Windows will tell you that you can actually use the computer during that time. I, however, do not recommend it. You don't want to have a blue screen or any problems that disrupt the disabling of Bitlocker, because if you do have a crash, you may never get access to your files again after that. After Bitlocker has been disabled, or if you actually needed to do it, in my case I did, in Linux, we're going to create a mount point for our Windows partition in the mount directory. We'll use the command make dir space /mnt space /windows. We'll use the mount command to mount the Windows partition. We also can create an entry in the /etc/fstab file so that we always have our Windows partition active when we boot up and we get instant access to it. In other words, the mount process will be automated. This is fairly important because since we have a 512 gigabyte drive and 200 gigabytes of that is our Windows partition, we're going to want to have access from Linux in the Windows partition just in case we're doing something where we need to get access to a file or a folder or some documents or videos that we might have saved on the Windows partition. In my case, when I use the mount command, the device that I had to mount was a very long name, and I'm going to show you that command here. In order to find out which of the many partitions that may be on our primary hard drive in the Yoga 920 is the Windows partition, we can use the command fdisk or lsblk. Either command will show you what you need to know. If you do use the fdisk command, I recommend using the pipe and the more command so that you can control output. It's a little bit easier to see. Once you've listed those partitions, it's easy to figure out which one is the correct Windows partition, and then you can use the mount command to go ahead and mount that partition. We also, again, can edit /etc/fs tab, put an entry in, and that particular partition will be mounted every time the computer boots. The other thing we can do in Dolphin is create a shortcut to the Windows partition so that we actually don't have to go hunting for it in the mount folder. It's nice to have that shortcut. It makes things so much easier in order for us to be able to get into Windows. Step number 16, and the very last thing I usually do, is play around a little bit with the default desktop settings in the view. My goal whenever I do a Linux installation is to stay relatively close to the stock installation to make my life a little bit easier. That way, if I have to do a reinstallation or I want to put Linux on a new computer, it's very quick and very simple for me to do the installation. Now, the one thing that I usually do change is the widgets up in the upper right-hand corner. I don't really like the defaults, and I do like that kind of arrow glass look that we used to see in Windows Vista and Windows 7, which I thought was beautiful. The whole flat look with Windows 10, I really don't find very attractive at all. Now, I've heard many people say that my KDE desktop does look like Vista, and they're trying to poke fun at me, but I actually like it, so I take it as a compliment. Thank you. If you don't like that, of course, there are many different settings, and you can download basically any desktop settings that you want. You could even have your KDE desktop looking just like Windows 10 if you really wanted to. But if you're going to do that, you might as well just go back to Windows 10. Step number 17, this one is an optional step. If you're a Steam user and you have some games that'll work in Linux, you can go ahead and install Steam on your Linux system as well just by going to the Steam website, downloading the package for Linux, and installing it. Now, I do have some Linux games and I'm in the process of doing some testing, and I found that they work quite well. The only thing is the Yoga 920 does have the built-in Intel graphics, and although they're quite good, they're really not designed all that well for gaming, especially in Linux. My experience has been that most of the games that I want to play are going to work in Windows, not in Linux, on the Yoga 920. This does not mean they will not work. The issue here is the GPU. If there was an NVIDIA GPU in here, it's very likely they would work much better. Now, at home I have an RX 580, and that particular card works excellent with the Linux supported games. I've not really had any problems playing games that are Linux with my RX 580 on my Dell using a Ryzen 1700 processor. So it's definitely going to be different than playing on the desktop. However, it's worth a try, and some games still are going to work. There are a whole bunch of other steps that you could add, and I'm sure many people will have recommendations and suggestions in the comments down below, so you might want to check that out because there are so many other software packages and things that you can install and things that you can do. One of them that comes to mind that I actually did install is Audacity. So I also have Audacity installed to do audio editing. I found that it's really useful to get the whine out of some of the videos that I record, out of the audio, and I can filter it out and then just re-upload that audio back in, and it does a great job. But check the comments. I know that my viewers always suggest other packages and other tips as well that you can do. Another thing that you can do is just do a general search for steps after installing Fedora 27. There are so many pages out there for users who have installed Fedora and things that they do, like installing different video and audio codecs so that you have support when you're using your system. Some of them codecs are not installed, so you might want to consider that as well. Well, that about wraps it up. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do decide to buy a Yoga 920, don't be intimidated about installing Linux on it. It's really no sweat at all. I found the process to be quite straightforward and easy compared to even the Yoga 910, which just came out last year. So jump in, get yourself some Linux, and you'll still have your Windows partition. You can go back and forth to whichever operating system you want, depending if you're playing a game or some other software that you want to use while you're in Windows. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy it, I always appreciate it when you like, and I really appreciate a subscription and a share. If you found it useful, drop a comment, let me know what you think. Let me know if you decided to do any other changes on your installation of Fedora Linux and how it went for you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time on FastGadgets. This video was made possible with support from viewers like you. If you find this video useful, consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/FastGadgets.